Right now, as you are listening to this, you believe something that is completely wrong. You do not know what it is, and that is the terrifying part, because if you knew it was wrong, you would stop believing it. But false beliefs do not announce themselves. They do not arrive wearing a sign that says fiction. They arrive quietly. They arrive dressed as common sense. They arrive feeling exactly like truth. And once they are inside your mind, they are almost impossible to see. This is not a flaw unique to you. This is what it means to be human. Your brain was not designed to see reality clearly. It was designed to keep you alive. And for hundreds of thousands of years, that worked. Your ancestors did not need to evaluate statistics or detect media bias. They needed to avoid predators, find food, and stay connected to their group. The brain you inherited is optimized for survival, not for truth. And in the modern world, that gap between what your brain was built for and what it is being asked to do creates problems that most people never even notice. You think you make rational decisions. You do not. You think you see the world as it is. You do not. You think your opinions are formed by careful analysis. Most of them are not. They are formed by emotion, habit, social pressure, and stories your brain constructed to make you feel certain about things you have never truly examined. This audiobook is about waking up from that comfortable illusion. It is about learning to see the hidden machinery behind your thoughts. It is about understanding why you believe what you believe, how others shape and manipulate those beliefs, and how to build a mind that thinks more clearly, more honestly, and more independently. This will not always be comfortable. At certain moments, you may feel the urge to disagree, to push back, to dismiss what you are hearing. If that happens, pay close attention to that feeling, because that discomfort, that resistance, is often the signal that you have touched a bias. Your brain is trying to protect a belief, and the fact that a belief needs that kind of protection should tell you something important. Let us begin. Chapter 1. Why Smart People Believe Stupid Things. In 1922, Arthur Conan Doyle published a book called The Coming of the Fairies. In it, he presented photographs of tiny winged creatures dancing in an English garden and declared them to be genuine evidence of supernatural beings. He analyzed the images carefully. He interviewed the witnesses thoroughly. He constructed detailed arguments for why these photographs could not possibly be faked. He was completely, absolutely, unshakably convinced. Arthur Conan Doyle was not a foolish man. He was a trained physician, a celebrated author, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, arguably the most logical and rational fictional character in the history of literature. The man who gave the world the phrase, "When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth," looked at cardboard cutouts stuck into a garden with hat pins, photographed by two teenage girls with a borrowed camera, and saw real fairies. How is this possible? It is possible because intelligence and critical thinking are not the same thing, not even close. Intelligence is raw processing power. It is the speed at which you can absorb information, recognize patterns, hold complex ideas in your mind, and form connections between concepts. Critical thinking is something entirely different. It is the discipline of stopping, of questioning, of examining whether the patterns you see are real or imagined, of asking whether the evidence you have gathered actually supports the conclusion you have reached, of noticing when your emotions are doing the work that evidence should be doing. You can be extraordinarily intelligent and still be a poor critical thinker. And here is the part that makes this dangerous. When a person of average intelligence holds a false belief, they might have one or two weak reasons supporting it. Those reasons are easy to challenge. But when a brilliant person holds a false belief, they can build an entire fortress around it. They can defend it with sophisticated language, with carefully selected data, with logical structures that sound airtight, with references and analogies woven together into something that appears completely convincing. The architecture is brilliant, the foundation is rotten, and the more intelligent the person, the more impressive the architecture, and the harder it is for anyone, including themselves, to see the cracks underneath. Linus Pauling won 2 Nobel Prizes, one for chemistry, one for peace. He is one of only 4 individuals in history to receive 2 Nobel Prizes. By any reasonable measure, he was one of the most intelligent human beings of the 20th century, and in his later years, he became utterly convinced that massive doses of vitamin C could cure cancer. He wrote books advocating this position. He founded an entire institute dedicated to exploring it. He took enormous doses of vitamin C himself every single day. To the scientific evidence did not support his claims. Multiple clinical trials showed no significant benefit, but Pauling dismissed those studies. He questioned their methodology. He suggested hidden bias in the research community. He never updated his position. Why? Because his belief had become part of his identity. His intelligence was no longer searching for truth. It was defending territory. His extraordinary analytical mind had been redirected from evaluating evidence to protecting a conclusion he had already reached. This is a trap that catches everyone. Not just Nobel laureates and famous authors. You have beliefs right now that you hold not because evidence supports them, but because they are woven into your sense of who you are, your political worldview, your ideas about success, your assumptions about certain people and certain groups. Some of these beliefs may be correct, some may not be, but the deeper question is whether you could actually tell the difference, whether you could honestly evaluate your own beliefs the way you would evaluate a stranger's argument. If you feel confident that you could, be careful. That confidence itself may be the biggest bias of all. Chapter 2. The Architecture of the Mind. Cognitive biases. Your brain is the most complex structure in the known universe. Roughly 86 billion neurons, approximately 100 trillion synaptic connections, processing roughly 11 million bits of sensory information every single second. But your conscious awareness can only handle around 40 to 50 bits of that per second. Think about what that means. The overwhelming majority of your brain's processing, more than 99.9% of it, happens completely below the surface of your awareness. You do not see it. You do not direct it. You do not even know it is happening. To manage this impossible gap between the flood of incoming information and the narrow channel of conscious thought, your brain takes shortcuts. These shortcuts are called heuristics. They are fast rules of thumb that give you a quick, good enough answer without requiring deep analysis every time. When you walk into a room and instantly sense something is off, that is a heuristic. When you look at a stranger's face and immediately form an impression of whether they are trustworthy, that is a heuristic. When you make a snap judgment about a new restaurant based on how the entrance looks, that is a heuristic. Most of the time, these shortcuts serve you reasonably. Well, they evolved because speed was survival. The ancestor, who paused to carefully analyze whether the shadow in the grass was a predator or just a rock, did not survive long enough to become your ancestor. The one who reacted instantly and ran did. But these ancient shortcuts were built for a world that no longer exists. They were calibrated for a world of small tribal groups, simple physical dangers, and predictable natural environments. They were not designed for a world of global information networks, sophisticated psychological manipulation, algorithmic content curation, political propaganda designed by experts, and financial systems of mind-bending complexity. When ancient mental shortcuts are applied to modern problems, they fail. And they fail in specific, predictable, documentable ways. These systematic failures are what we call cognitive biases. The research community has catalogued over 180 of them. Your brain contains every single one. They influence what you notice and what you overlook, what you remember and what you conveniently forget, how you interpret events and how you misinterpret them, what decisions you make and why you make them. And the most dangerous feature of cognitive biases is this: you cannot feel them operating. They run below the threshold of conscious awareness. You do not experience them as distortions. You experience them as insight. You experience them as common sense. You experience them as truth. Let me give you an example. That is almost certainly going to feel familiar. Think about the last time another driver did something dangerous or irritating near you, cut you off, ran a light, drove far too slowly in the wrong lane. What was your immediate thought about that person? Most likely you formed a judgment about their character. They are reckless, they are inconsiderate, they are bad at driving. Now, think about the last time you made a driving mistake, misjudged a gap, missed a turn, moved lanes without checking carefully enough. What did you tell yourself in that moment? Almost certainly you reached for circumstances. You were tired. You were distracted. The road layout was confusing. You did not judge your own character. You explained your situation. Same behavior, radically different interpretation, depending entirely on whether it was you or someone else doing it. This is called the fundamental attribution error. It is one of the most pervasive and consequential biases in human cognition, and it operates on you constantly, invisibly, and without your permission. Chapter 3. Confirmation Bias. If there is one thing you remember from this entire audiobook, let it be this chapter. Because confirmation bias is not just one bias among many. It is the master bias, the one that quietly distorts everything else, the one that operates continuously in every area of your life, every single day. Confirmation bias is your brain's powerful tendency to seek out, notice, remember, and trust information that confirms what you already believe, while simultaneously ignoring, forgetting, dismissing, or aggressively discrediting information that contradicts those beliefs. This is not a conscious choice. It is not something you decide to do on purpose. Your brain does it automatically, silently, and with extraordinary efficiency. As far as your conscious mind is concerned, you are being completely objective. You are looking at all the evidence. You are being fair, but you are not, because your brain has already filtered the evidence before it reaches your awareness. The verdict was decided before the trial began. Let me show you how this works. Imagine you already believe that a particular approach to health and nutrition is the correct one. Now you encounter an article praising that approach. You feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. You read it fully. You absorb it easily. You might share it. Then you come across a peer-reviewed study that challenges your approach. Suddenly, your thinking shifts gears. You become skeptical. You look for problems in the methodology. You question the sample size. You wonder about the funding source. You consider whether the researchers might have had an agenda. You may decide the study is simply not reliable. Same analytical brain, same person. Completely different standards applied to each piece of evidence. Not a search for truth, a search for comfort. In 1979, researchers at Stanford University ran one of the most important psychology experiments of the 20th century. They recruited participants who held strong views on the death penalty, some strongly in favor, some strongly opposed. Both groups were given identical sets of evidence. 2. Research studies on whether the death penalty deterred crime. One study appeared to support. Deterrence one appeared to contradict. Yet both were methodologically comparable. The rational prediction was that exposure to mixed evidence would push both groups toward the center, toward nuance, toward uncertainty. Instead, the opposite happened. After reading the same evidence, supporters of the death penalty became more strongly in favor. Opponents became more strongly opposed. Both groups accepted the study that confirmed their view and found significant methodological flaws in the study that challenged it. Same evidence, more polarized outcomes. This experiment has been replicated across dozens of different topics, cultures, and settings. The result is consistent every time. Mixed evidence does not produce moderate opinions. In the presence of bias, it produces more extreme ones. Now consider what happens when you place this bias inside the modern social media ecosystem. Every platform tracks your behavior in extraordinary detail. Every article you open, every video you watch, every post you engage with, every second you spend on each piece of content. The algorithm builds a sophisticated model of your beliefs, your preferences, your emotional triggers, and your psychological vulnerabilities. Then it delivers content calibrated to maximize your engagement. And what maximizes engagement? Emotional intensity. Content that confirms your beliefs and makes you feel righteous gets clicks. Content that challenges your beliefs and creates discomfort gets scrolled past. So the algorithm learns, it feeds you confirmation and withholds challenge. And over weeks, months, years of this process, something profound and disturbing happens. Your information world becomes completely sealed. Your beliefs are reflected back at you from every direction, amplified, validated, never seriously questioned. The other side of any issue stops feeling like a different perspective, held by reasonable people. It starts feeling like madness, like something no sane or moral person could believe, because you have never genuinely encountered the best arguments from that other side. You have only seen the worst examples, the most extreme statements, the most outrageous moments, all carefully selected by an algorithm that knows outrage keeps you engaged. This is not a political problem. It is a thinking problem, and it affects every person regardless of where they stand on any issue. How do you fight it? Charles Darwin had a practice worth emulating. Whenever he encountered evidence that seemed to challenge his theories, he would write it down immediately in a dedicated notebook, not because he enjoyed being wrong, but because he understood his own mind well enough to know that his brain would try to quietly erase inconvenient evidence. He created an external record that his internal bias could not delete. You can do something similar. When you hold a strong opinion about anything, deliberately search for the most compelling, most evidence-based, most intelligent arguments against that opinion. Not the weakest version you can find, not the most extreme caricature, the strongest version. The argument that actually makes you think, the argument that takes real effort to address. If your belief survives that test, it is genuinely strong. If it does not, you have just discovered something valuable. You were wrong, and discovering that you were wrong before that wrongness causes damage is one of the most useful experiences a thinking person can have. Chapter 4. Survivorship Bias. There is a cemetery you have never visited. It is vast. It is silent. It is full of failed businesses, abandoned strategies, broken careers, and discredited ideas. Nobody gives tours of this cemetery. Nobody writes best-selling books about its residents. Nobody builds documentaries around their stories. And because you never see it, you form deeply distorted beliefs about what success requires. This is survivorship bias, and it is shaping your understanding of the world in ways you have likely never considered at a farm. Most famous illustration comes from the Second World War. The United States military was losing an unacceptable number of bomber aircraft to enemy fire over Europe. They wanted to add protective armor, but armor adds weight, and weight reduces performance. So they needed to determine strategically where to add it. Military analysts studied the aircraft returning from missions and carefully mapped where the bullet holes were concentrated. The data was clear. The wings showed heavy damage. The fuselage showed heavy damage. The tail section showed heavy damage. The cockpit and engines showed very little damage. The initial military conclusion seemed obvious. Reinforce the areas with the most bullet holes. That is where the enemy is targeting the planes. Abraham Wald, a mathematician who had fled Europe and was working with the American military, looked at exactly the same data and drew the opposite conclusion. He told the military they were making a critical error in their reasoning. The planes they were studying, he explained, were the planes that came back. The bullet holes in the wings and fuselage represented the damage a plane could absorb and still fly home. The planes that took catastrophic hits to the cockpit and the engines did not return. They were destroyed over enemy territory. The data on those planes was absent, not because those areas were safe, but because damage there was fatal. By studying only the survivors, the military was about to armor the wrong parts of the airplane. Waldy recommended reinforcing the areas with the fewest bullet holes, because those were the areas where damage killed planes entirely. He was right. Now consider how this principle operates in the parts of your life that matter most to you. How many times have you heard something like this? Look at the great entrepreneurs who dropped out of college. Bill Gates dropped out. Steve Jobs dropped out. Mark Zuckerberg dropped out. The pattern seems to suggest that formal education is unnecessary for extraordinary success. Maybe even that it holds ambitious people back. But think for a moment about the data you are not seeing. How many people dropped out of college, hoping to build something extraordinary, and instead spent years struggling in obscurity before eventually returning to conventional careers? The answer is millions, literally millions, but they do not give keynote speeches. They do not appear on the covers of business magazines. They do not get biographies. They are invisible. They are in the cemetery you never visit. When you study only Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, you are studying 3 survivors out of millions of people who made the same initial choice. You are reverse engineering a pattern from a profoundly biased sample, and the conclusions you draw from that biased sample will lead you toward decisions that the complete data would never support. The same dynamic appears everywhere. Follow your passion, and the money will follow. This advice comes exclusively from people whose passion happened to align with market demand at exactly the right moment. For every musician who followed their passion and built a career, there are 10,000 who followed their passion and played empty rooms until they could no longer afford to continue. You hear from the ones who made it. The vast majority are invisible. Every rags to riches story you have ever been inspired by is a story told by a survivor about a survivor to an audience that cannot see the graveyard behind the stage. The antidote to survivorship bias requires deliberate effort against a powerful instinct. Whenever you encounter a success story, make yourself ask the question that does not come naturally. Where are the people who did the same thing and failed? How many of them were there? What does the complete picture look like, including the failures? The graveyard holds more truth than the trophy case, but you have to be willing to walk through it with your eyes open. Chapter 5. Logical fallacies. An argument can be delivered with complete confidence. It can sound sophisticated and well-reasoned. It can be applauded by a large audience. And it can still be fundamentally, structurally, logically broken. These broken arguments are called logical fallacies, and they are everywhere. In political speeches, in advertising campaigns, in news. commentary in social media debates, in dinner table conversations, and with uncomfortable frequency in the arguments you make yourself. A logical fallacy is not simply a mistake. It is a specific, identifiable error in reasoning, a pattern of flawed logic that makes an argument appear stronger than it actually is. Learning to recognize fallacies is like learning to see through a magic trick. Once you understand the mechanism, the illusion collapses, and you begin to notice the mechanism everywhere. Let us go through the ones that matter most. Ad hominem. This is the practice of attacking the person making an argument, rather than addressing the argument itself. You cannot talk about poverty. You have never been poor. Why should I listen to you on this topic? You are not a scientist. Of course you believe that, given who you are. The logical error here is treating the identity or character of the speaker as relevant to the validity of what they are saying. But validity is not a function of biography. A person with a troubled past can make a logically sound argument. A person with impeccable credentials can make a logically broken one. Evaluate the argument, not the person. Straw man. This is one of the most frequently used techniques in public debate, and one of the most intellectually dishonest. Rather than engaging with what someone actually said, you subtly distort their position into an extreme or weakened version, then attack that version as though it were the original. Someone argues for moderate regulatory reform. The response comes back, so you want total government control of everything. Someone expresses concern about the pace of change in a particular area. The response comes back, so you think we should never improve anything and just stay stuck in the past forever. Neither of those is what was said, but the distorted version is much easier to defeat, so the straw man is built and knocked down, and the actual argument is never addressed. Appeal to authority. Expertise matters enormously. Decades of careful research, specialized training, and deep domain knowledge are genuinely valuable. But the appeal to authority fallacy occurs when the prestige of a source is used as a substitute for evidence and argument. It is especially dangerous when a respected expert steps outside their area of expertise. A Nobel Prize-winning physicist is an extraordinary authority on physics. They are not automatically an authority on nutrition, economics, or public policy. Their fame does not transfer. Their credentials in one domain do not create expertise in another. Ask always not who is saying something, but what evidence and reasoning supports what is being said. False dilemma, also known as black and white thinking, or the either-or fallacy. This is the move that presents a situation as having only two possible options, when in reality the full range of possibilities is far richer and more complex. You are either completely with us or you are our enemy. You either support this measure entirely or you want people to suffer. You either believe everything I have said or you think I am lying. Real life almost never offers only two choices. Most important questions exist on a spectrum. Most complex issues have dozens of possible responses, positions, nuances, and gradations. When someone presents you with exactly two options and insists you must choose between them, that constraint is almost always artificial. Push back against it. There is almost always a third possibility, often a fourth and fifth slippery slope. This fallacy argues that accepting one reasonable first step will inevitably trigger a cascade of increasingly extreme consequences, usually without providing any logical justification for why each step in the chain would actually follow from the previous one. If we allow students to use calculators, they will stop learning arithmetic. If they stop learning arithmetic, they will become dependent on machines for all thinking. If they become dependent on machines for all thinking, they will lose the ability to reason independently. If they lose that ability, civilization itself is at risk. Each link in that chain requires independent evidence. The fact that A might lead to B does not automatically mean B will lead to C, but the technique works because it activates fear. You are not asked to evaluate the logic. You are asked to react to the terrifying endpoint.bandwagon fallacy, the claim that because something is widely believed or widely done, it must be correct or advisable. Millions of people think this, so it must be true. Everyone is doing this, so you should too. The number of people who hold a belief has zero bearing on whether that belief is accurate. At various points in human history, virtually everyone believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, that certain diseases were caused by bad air, that certain groups of people were inherently inferior to others. The majority was comprehensively wrong in every case. Truth is not determined by a show of hands, or popularity and accuracy are completely separate qualities. Learn these patterns, internalize them. Because once you can see the structure of a fallacious argument, you can no longer be fooled by it, no matter how confident the delivery, no matter how large the applause. Chapter 6. Media Manipulation. Here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. Do you believe the world is getting better or getting worse? Take your time with it. Most people, when asked this question across most countries and most demographic groups, say the world is getting worse. They feel that society is becoming more dangerous, that problems are multiplying, that things are deteriorating in ways that feel both accelerating and irreversible. And yet the long-run data, across almost every dimension of human welfare that can be measured, tells a different story. Extreme poverty, defined as surviving on less than $2 a day adjusted for purchasing power, affected approximately 43% of the global population in 1900. By 2015, that figure had fallen below 10%. In roughly 1 century, the share of humanity living in the most severe material deprivation dropped by more than 3/4. This is arguably the most significant improvement in human welfare in the recorded history of our species. Global literacy in 1900 was approximately 21%. Today it exceeds 86%. Child mortality, the death of children before their 5th birthday, has fallen from roughly 40% at the beginning of the 20th century to below 4% today. Global average life expectancy has more than doubled over the same period. Deaths from warfare, as a share of the global population, have declined dramatically across the centuries, despite devastating conflicts in the 20th century. So why does virtually everyone feel that the world is falling apart? The answer has 2 parts. The first is in your brain. Your mind evolved with what researchers call negativity bias. Negative information, danger signals, threats, losses, bad outcomes, commands more immediate attention than positive information. It is processed more deeply. It is remembered more vividly. It influences behavior more powerfully. This was adaptive for your ancestors. Missing a threat could be fatal. Missing a positive opportunity was merely unfortunate. So, the brains that survived were the ones calibrated to treat bad news as more urgent and more important than good news. You inherited that calibration. The second part is in the media. Ecosystem. Media organizations, regardless of format, compete for a single resource: your attention, and they have learned, through decades of audience research and financial feedback, exactly what most reliably captures and holds human attention: threat, conflict, outrage, danger, fear. A story about gradual improvement over decades does not compete. A story about immediate danger, shocking failure, or dramatic conflict wins every time. Not because journalists are dishonest, though some are, but because the economics of attention reward negativity so powerfully that the entire industry gravitates toward it. The result is a systematic distortion. Day after day, week after week, you are fed a diet of the most threatening, most alarming, most outrageous events available, the vast middle ground of ordinary life, the progress that happens incrementally, the problems that get quietly solved, the dangers that do not materialize. All of it goes unreported, and your brain, exposed to that distorted diet, constructs a distorted picture of reality. Social media has taken this dynamic and accelerated it beyond anything traditional media ever achieved. And MIT study examining roughly 126,000 stories spread on Twitter over more than a decade found that false news spread approximately 6 times faster than true. News.false stories were 70% more likely to be shared than accurate ones. And this was not the work of automated bots, it was the work of human beings choosing to share content. Why did humans spread false news faster than true news? Because false news in that study was found to be more novel, more emotionally provocative, more surprising. It triggered stronger reactions. Stronger emotions produced stronger impulses to share. The algorithm rewards what produces engagement. Engagement is produced by emotion. Emotion is most reliably triggered by content that is alarming, outrageous, or threatening. Truth is often none of these things, so truth loses, not always, not in every case, but consistently enough and at enough scale that the information environment most people inhabit bears a distorted relationship to actual reality. What can you do? Recognize first that your perception of the world is being actively shaped by systems that are not designed to inform you. They are designed to capture and monetize your attention. That recognition alone changes how you receive information. Deliberately diversify where your information comes from. Read across ideological lines. Seek out sources that challenge rather than confirm. When a news story triggers an immediate and powerful emotional response, treat that intensity as a signal to slow down rather than to react. Ask whether the story is trying to help you understand something or trying to provoke a particular feeling, and periodically check your beliefs about the state of the world against the actual long-run data. You may discover that the world you have constructed in your mind is significantly darker than the world that actually exists. Chapter 7. Think like a scientist. If there is one mental framework that can counteract the biases, resist the manipulation, and cut through the fallacies, it is the framework of scientific thinking. Not science as a collection of facts, not science as a profession requiring laboratory equipment and academic credentials. Science as a method, a disciplined approach to reducing self-deception and arriving at beliefs that more accurately reflect reality. The core principle of scientific thinking is deceptively simple. Try to prove yourself wrong. This runs directly against every natural instinct you have. Thus, your brain is wired to seek confirmation, to defend existing beliefs, to construct narratives that make you right. Scientific thinking demands the opposite discipline. You form a tentative belief, a hypothesis, and then you actively search for evidence that would disprove it. You design tests that could reveal your hypothesis to be false. You look hardest at the evidence that seems most threatening to what you already think. If your hypothesis survives serious and rigorous attempts to destroy it, your confidence in it increases, but the posture remains humble, tentative, open to revision, always aware that future evidence might change everything. If the hypothesis fails the test, you do not mourn. You have learned something. You have moved closer to truth by discovering what is not true. Karl Popper, one of the most important philosophers of science in the 20th century, described this principle as falsifiability. A claim is scientifically meaningful if and only if it can, in principle, be demonstrated to be false, not if it can be proven true. If it could be shown to be false, this distinction matters enormously. All swans are white is a falsifiable claim. You could, in principle, Find a black swan and disprove it. In fact, black swans exist, and the claim was disproven. Everything happens for a reason is not falsifiable. No possible observation could disprove it. Because any outcome can be reinterpreted as the reason. A claim that cannot be tested cannot be improved. A belief that nothing could challenge is not a conclusion. It is an article of faith. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize-winning physicist and one of the great scientific communicators of the 20th century, said something that should be in the mind of every thinking person. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. This is not false modesty. This is the foundational recognition that makes genuine thinking possible. Your brain is not primarily a truth-finding machine. It is a story-making machine. It will construct coherent, convincing, emotionally satisfying narratives that you will mistake for insight. It will fill gaps with assumption. It will smooth over contradictions. It will present you with confidence about things you have no real grounds for certainty. About the scientific discipline is the ongoing, effortful practice of catching your own mind in these acts. How does this apply in everyday life? Before accepting a claim, ask whether it could, in principle, be tested and found to be false. If no possible evidence could ever challenge it, that is a warning sign. Before acting on a belief, ask what evidence would make you reconsider. If the answer is nothing, the belief has become dogma, and dogma is the enemy of learning. Before drawing a conclusion from two things happening together, ask whether you have actual evidence of a causal mechanism, or whether you are observing coincidence. Correlation is extraordinarily common. True causation is far rarer than it appears, and when someone tells you that something works, based on their personal experience, remember that personal experience, however vivid and sincere, is the weakest form of evidence. It is subject to placebo effects, to coincidence, to memory distortion, and to every bias in this audiobook. One person's experience tells you almost nothing about what is generally true. Chapter 8. The Power of Asking Better. Questions. The quality of your thinking is not determined primarily by what you know. It is determined by the quality of the questions you ask. Questions are the steering mechanism of the mind. Poor questions produce circular thinking. They confirm what you already believe and lead you back to where you started. Better. Questions break patterns. They reveal assumptions you did not know you were making. They expose the gaps in reasoning that were invisible before you asked. Most people, most of the time, do not genuinely question the information they receive. They accept information that aligns with their existing views and dismiss information that challenges them. Both responses happen automatically, below the level of deliberate thought. Neither involves real critical engagement. Here is a toolkit of questions that will sharpen your thinking in any situation. The first question: what is the evidence for this claim? This is the most fundamental question in all of critical thinking, and it is the one people ask least often. When someone makes a claim, any claim, ask for actual evidence, not personal conviction, not tradition, not the fact that many people believe it, not the impressiveness of the person saying it. Verifiable, testable evidence. You would be genuinely startled by how often a claim that is delivered with total confidence, backed by an impressive title or a large following, has no substantial evidence supporting it at all. Confidence is not evidence. Repetition is not evidence. Authority is not evidence. Popularity is not evidence. Only evidence is evidence. The second question: who benefits from my believing this? Every message has a source. Every source has interests, motivations, and blind spots. This does not mean every source is dishonest. It means every source brings a perspective, and understanding that perspective is essential for evaluating what they are telling you. A company that funds research into its own products has a financial stake in the outcome, a political organization releasing data about the economy has an electoral stake in how that data is interpreted. A social media account promoting a lifestyle has a commercial relationship with the brands that lifestyle requires. None of these facts automatically invalidate the information, but they tell you to look more carefully. The third question, what is missing? Every story is a selection. Every article, every speech, every argument chooses what to include and what to omit. What has been left out is often more important than what was included. When you hear a success story, ask where the failures are. When you see a statistic that sounds striking, ask what the baseline was. When an argument seems airtight, ask what the strongest counterargument is and why it has not been addressed. The fourth question, is this correlation or causation? Two things happening at the same time, or being statistically associated, does not mean one caused the other. This error appears constantly in news articles, health claims, business advice, and policy arguments. There is almost always a true causal mechanism beneath genuine causation. If someone cannot clearly explain how A actually produces B, be skeptical of the causal claim. The fifth question, what would change my mind? This is the question that distinguishes genuine thinkers from defenders of fixed positions. A rational belief has conditions. There is some form of evidence that, if it emerged, would cause you to revise your view. If you cannot specify what that evidence would look like, your belief has moved beyond the territory of thinking and into the territory of dogma. Ask this question honestly about your most important beliefs. The answers will be illuminating. Chapter 9. How to make better decisions. Everything we have discussed throughout this audiobook leads here, to the practical moment of choice, because the purpose of clearer thinking is not to sound more sophisticated in conversations, it is to make better decisions. And decisions are the architecture of your life, not dramatic singular decisions alone. The daily choices, the small judgments, the habitual ways you evaluate information and respond to uncertainty. These accumulate over years into outcomes that look like destiny, but were actually chosen, piece by piece, through the quality of your thinking. The first principle of better decision-making is to distinguish between decisions that can be reversed and decisions that cannot. Jeff Bezos articulated this as the difference between one-way doors and two-way doors. A two-way door decision is one you can reverse if it proves to be wrong. You can walk back through the door. For these decisions, the cost of excessive deliberation is high and the cost of error is relatively low. Make them quickly. Do not spend disproportionate time and energy on choices where course correction is readily available. A one-way door decision is different in kind. It is difficult or impossible to reverse. It forecloses future options in significant ways. For these decisions, the cost of error can be enormous and permanent. Slow down dramatically. Seek multiple perspectives. Force yourself to consider the downside with the same energy you bring to imagining the upside. The second principle is to run a pre-mortem before important commitments. Most people do post-mortems. After something fails, they analyze what went wrong. The pre-mortem asks the same question before the failure happens. Imagine that it is 1 year from today, and the decision you're about to make has turned out to be a serious mistake. What went wrong? Write down every plausible answer to that question before committing. This technique is powerful precisely because it bypasses the optimism that naturally attaches to decisions we are excited about. Optimism is valuable, but unexamined optimism is how intelligent people walk into catastrophes they could have foreseen. The third principle is to think in probabilities rather than certainties. The world is not binary. Outcomes are rarely guaranteed. Almost everything exists on a spectrum of likelihood. Training yourself to think probabilistically, to ask not will this work, but what is the realistic probability that this will work, changes how you approach risk, how you prepare for alternative outcomes, and how you evaluate results afterward. A decision with a 70% chance of success that does not succeed was not necessarily a bad decision. It was a good decision that produced the less likely outcome. The quality of a decision must be judged by the process that produced it, not exclusively by the result. This distinction between process quality and outcome quality is one of the most important insights in the study of good decision-making, and it is one of the most consistently ignored. The fourth principle is to actively seek disconfirming evidence before finalizing any significant commitment. Specifically, assign the task of finding the strongest arguments against your planned course of action. Not weak objections that are easy to dismiss. The strongest objections you can locate. If your plan survives engagement with the best counterarguments available, proceed with genuine confidence. If it does not survive that engagement, you have saved yourself from a potentially serious mistake. The fifth principle is to think about second and third order effects. First-order thinking stops at the immediate consequence. Second-order thinking asks what comes next after that consequence. Third-order thinking asks what comes after that. Decisions that look excellent at the first-order level often look very different when their downstream consequences become visible. Train yourself to think at least one level deeper than your initial analysis. Ask not only what will happen, but what will happen because of what happens. Chapter 10. Becoming an independent thinker. Every chapter of this audiobook has been building toward this final destination, not simply recognizing bias, not simply identifying fallacies, not simply consuming information more carefully, but developing, through practice and discipline and honesty, the capacity to think independently, to form your own understanding of the world through genuine reasoning, to be neither a blind follower nor a reflexive contrarian, but a person who actually thinks. An independent thinker is not someone who disagrees with everything as a point of principle. That is not independence, that is merely a different form of automatic reaction. An independent thinker is someone who evaluates ideas on evidence and reasoning regardless of their source, who holds conclusions proportional to the strength of the arguments supporting them, who revises those conclusions when better evidence or better arguments become available, who can sit comfortably with uncertainty without being paralyzed by it, and who can hold a minority view when the evidence supports it, and a majority view when the evidence supports that, without the position being determined by social pressure in either case. This requires several things that do not come naturally. The first is separating your beliefs from your identity. When what you believe becomes who you are, challenging the belief feels like an attack on yourself. You stop evaluating evidence and start defending territory. The belief is no longer a working hypothesis you hold tentatively. It is a part of you, something to be protected. Train yourself to hold even your most important beliefs with a degree of provisional attachment. You are not your opinions. You are the thinker behind the opinions, and the thinker can always form better opinions when evidence and reasoning demand it. The second is cultivating genuine intellectual humility. Intellectual humility is not the performance of uncertainty. It is not pretending to be less confident than you are. It is the accurate recognition that your knowledge has limits, that your reasoning has vulnerabilities, and that you have been wrong before and will be wrong again. It means holding even your strongest convictions with some awareness that they could be improved. It means saying, "I do not know," when you do not know. It means saying, "I was wrong," when evidence shows you were wrong. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of intellectual maturity. The third is reading broadly and deliberately outside your existing worldview. If every book you read, every podcast you listen to, every source you follow confirms what you already believe, you are not expanding your mind. You are reinforcing a cage. Deliberately seek out the serious, thoughtful, well-argued perspectives that challenge your assumptions. Not the worst versions of opposing views, not the most extreme representatives of ideas you find uncomfortable. The best versions. The arguments that actually make you think. The ones that take real intellectual effort to engage with. This will be uncomfortable. Growth always is. The fourth is the willingness to change your mind publicly. In cultures that treat consistency as a virtue, publicly updating a position can feel like an admission of defeat. But changing your mind in response to new evidence is not weakness. It is the highest form of intellectual integrity. It demonstrates that you care more about being accurate than about appearing certain. It demonstrates that your commitment is to truth, not to the preservation of a public image. The economist John Maynard Keynes, when criticized for apparently contradicting an earlier position, is said to have replied, "When the facts change, I change my mind." What do? Make that your standard. The fifth is practicing daily. Critical thinking is not a course you complete. It is a discipline you build. Every day brings opportunities to apply what we have discussed. Every news story you encounter, every argument you hear, every decision you face is an opportunity to ask better questions, to look for missing evidence, to check for fallacies, to notice when your emotions are doing the work that reasoning should be doing. The more consistently you practice, the more natural the habits become. Until careful thinking is not an effortful override of your instincts, but a part of how you naturally move through the world. We live in an age of extraordinary information abundance. More data is created every day than existed in entire centuries of human history. The device in your pocket contains access to more accumulated human knowledge than was available in the greatest libraries of the ancient world. And yet, misinformation spreads faster than it ever has before. Polarization deepens. People hold beliefs that crumble at the lightest pressure of evidence. Important decisions, personal and collective, are made based on distorted perceptions, emotional manipulation, and reasoning riddled with fallacies. Information abundance has not produced wisdom, because information without critical thinking is not a resource, it is a liability. A person surrounded by unlimited information, but lacking the capacity to evaluate it, is not better informed. They are more efficiently manipulated. Critical thinking is not an academic discipline. It is not something reserved for philosophers and scientists. It is the foundational competence for anyone who wants to navigate the modern world with their eyes open. It is what allows you to evaluate a news story before reacting to it, to examine a medical claim before following its advice, to assess a financial opportunity before committing your resources, to understand a political argument before lending it your support, to know your own mind well enough to catch it in the act of misleading you. The world does not need more information. It has that in abundance. The world needs more people who can think, people who ask harder questions, people who demand evidence, people who recognize manipulation, people who can sit with uncertainty without collapsing into comfortable certainty, people who are willing to be wrong to discover they were wrong, to change, and to be better for it. Albert Einstein, reflecting in his later years on the power that advanced technology had placed in human hands, observed that the unleashed power of the atom has changed everything, save our modes of thinking. That observation is more urgent now than when he made it. The tools available to shape human thinking are more powerful than anything he imagined. The scale at which misinformation can spread exceeds anything available to prior generations. The sophistication with which attention can be captured and directed for profit and power grows every year. If our modes of thinking do not evolve to meet this moment, all the progress and abundance of the modern world become something to be used against us. Think clearly, question honestly, demand evidence. Sit comfortably with uncertainty, change your mind when the evidence calls for it, and never stop examining your own thinking with the same rigor and honesty you wish everyone else would bring to theirs. Your mind is the most powerful instrument you possess. Treat it accordingly. Thank you for listening.